The defendants were inspired by ISIS to carry out their attack. There should be no confusion about what ISIS constitutes. It is a designated foreign terrorist organization responsible for deadly terrorist attacks across the globe and has taken credit for mass casualty attacks in Europe, the Middle East, and right here in the United States. And as alleged, both defendants have admitted that they acted on Saturday because of ISIS. The defendants were inspired by ISIS to carry out their attack. There should be no confusion about what ISIS constitutes. It is a designated foreign terrorist organization responsible for deadly terrorist attacks across the globe and has taken credit for mass casualty attacks in Europe, the Middle East, and right here in the United States. And as alleged, both defendants have admitted that they acted on Saturday because of ISIS.
Meanwhile, the federal government's alerting law enforcement agencies Iran may be activating sleeper cells. The alert says the U.S. intercepted encrypted communications that may serve as an operational trigger for sleeper assets. ABC's contributor, former Homeland Security official Elizabeth Newman's here for more on that. Hi, Elizabeth. So you say officials are concerned Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, might have agents inside the U.S. So given that context, how concerning is this new alert, and how are law enforcement agencies monitoring for these potential threats?
Anytime we go to war overseas, there is a homeland threat component to it, especially a country like Iran does not have the capability to beat us militarily, so they rely on asymmetric means. So they will look to use cyber attacks, they will look to use proxies like Hezbollah, criminal agents to try to disrupt things here in the homeland. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing this bulletin. I'm a little concerned that it took a week for this to come out. I've talked to a number of state and local partners over the last week. Everybody knew that this is the likely scenario. We go to war with Iran, we should expect that their proxies are possibly being activated, and we all need to be on heightened alert.
And Elizabeth, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling on President Trump to tap the strategic petroleum reserves to lower gas prices. What impact could that have, and what does the president need to consider here?
Well, traditionally, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is not going to drop our gas prices significantly. What we just heard from Elizabeth Schulze is something that we as consumers are going to have to deal with for probably some time, for the amount of time that this military conflict takes to come to an end. But there is some benefit, especially if you think about the fuel that the government needs to use. I think about even in the Department of Homeland Security's mission. It is a very large department with a ton of mission. We have Coast Guard, we have Border Patrol, we have any number of emergency management needs where fuel is really important to be able to keep the lights on if you have a blackout. So it's important that we keep the fuel moving. I'll defer to the economist as to whether or not the release actually helps those of us who have to go fill up the car this week.
So how do rising gas prices affect Homeland Security operations?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, right? Like we are used to trying to predict a bit of a stable understanding of what the oil prices are going to be, and when you budget for your spend in an agency, and this isn't just the Department of Homeland Security, this would be any agency with operators that drive for the purpose of doing their patrols. This is true for state and local law enforcement as well. We rely on gas for getting people to where they need to be to keep us safe. So those prices go up pretty significantly, then yes, that blows your budget, which would be fine if we actually had acting budgets that had and grant funding that had been released. I am really concerned right now that the Department of Homeland Security is technically shut down with the exception of ICE. That has led to delays in funding for state and local partners. They've been 6 months without their Homeland Security grant funds, and they need those funds to be able to do things like purchase the more expensive fuel, but also to pay for law enforcement who might need to be on surge right now. We might need to be having extra patrol controls to make sure that mass gatherings or protests, as we saw in New York, remain safe. So the funding is really important here. We need that grant funding to be released.
You say the U.S. appears to be pursuing several different objectives in Iran at once. What do you mean by that, and what's your biggest concern?
Well, over the last week, we've heard a rotating a series of commentary from different members of the administration, including the president, and we keep hearing different things about what the objectives are. I have no doubt that the military knows what their objectives are from an operational perspective, and that they will, in all likelihood, be successful at accomplishing their objectives. There are planners, military planners, and those that oversee the execution of their military operations are excellent. But I am concerned that strategically we don't actually know what the end goal is here, and that's what I would like to hear from the president and from the Secretary of State. What are we ultimately hoping to accomplish with this military action?
Elizabeth, thank you.
This morning, a warning from the FBI about the potential for the enemy within. As tensions with Iran escalate, counterterrorism experts are raising concerns Iran could activate sleeper cells already here inside the U.S., especially troubling right now for a regime like Iran that has a long history of using proxy groups to carry out terrorism. Joining us now is veteran FBI agent in charge and former head of the Chicago PD, Jody Weiss. Good morning to you, sir. Let's start with the term sleeper cell. What exactly is it, and how do these sleeper cells operate inside a country like ours?
Yeah, great to be here, Jan. Sleeper cells are, as the name suggests, they're here, they're waiting. They come into the United States, they take part in normal life activities, they blend in, and then they wait. And then at some point they can be activated. Hezbollah has been here many times, so I'm always fearful of that group that could have come in during our past 4 years.
Yeah, and these are not just lone wolf actors. They can be trained operatives. They can blend in. They can hold jobs, have families. They can live quietly for years before they're quote-unquote activated. So how difficult are these types of operatives to detect, especially if they have little to no digital footprint?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, Jen. They're very difficult to pick up. They're not on social media. They aren't the flame-throwing protesters that we see on TV. These are people going to blend into our normal way of life. They could be your neighbor. They could be your friend. They could be anybody you run into normally. They are not going to be easy to detect, and that's what makes this such a dangerous situation.
How concerned?
You hear them? They can't track their footprint. Digital. This is another source that they're going to use to bring in the market of beast to justify it. The RFID chip. Sorry for interrupting.
Are you about the millions of gotaways that crossed the border during the Biden administration? We do not know who they are, where they are, or why they eluded capture.
I'm very concerned about that. And in my opinion, it would be impossible for our adversaries not to have taken advantage of that open border and send people across. And we know they're here, Jan. My friend Chris Swecker back in 2000, he was running the FBI's North Carolina office. They took down a terrorism cell, a sleeper cell, if you would. We know from prosecutions that Hezbollah has been prosecuted in New Jersey, New York, and in Michigan. So we know they're here. And that was before we had 4 years of an open border where I think our adversaries had to take advantage of that.
And what about radicalization? Because we hear about foreign nationals and illegal immigrants failing to assimilate. They remain isolated within their own communities. Does that make them more vulnerable to extremism, easier to recruit?
Yeah, I think it does. If you don't come to the United States, I've always said for immigrants to be successful, they've got to learn our language, take part, get a job, and actually be a part of that American dream, that the society, be a part of our society. If they don't, oftentimes what can happen overseas can influence their behavior and actions here. So you get somebody just keeps seeing stuff on the internet over and over again. If they don't feel a part of this country, they could very easily become radicalized and want to attack us.
And at the same time, the Iranian regime right now is under intense pressure, and history shows that when that regime feels cornered, it can become far more willing to take extreme risks. So are we looking at perhaps multi-city, simultaneous attacks, and how vulnerable are soft targets like hotels, transportation hubs, large public events? How vulnerable are those kinds of targets?
Jan, my biggest fear, other than a nuclear attack or a dirty bomb, would be a simultaneous multi-city attack. I was at the D.C. sniper case, and I saw where two individuals who had no interest in terror whatsoever. They were trying to kill an ex-wife, and they wanted her death to blend in with others. They shut down Virginia, D.C., and Maryland. Two idiots who were just going about wanting to kill someone. But think if that would have been a planned terrorist group in 5 or 6 different cities. But if you look at what a soft target is, it's a place where there's open access, easy accessibility, large crowds, and they're usually attacked in such a way to strike fear and really make us afraid of our normal way of life. So I got to steal a line from Sebastian Gorka. All of the viewers, please stay frosty. And by that I mean be prepared, stay alert, but don't get so paranoid that you let the threat of terrorism influence your life. There's not a terrorist behind every tree, but please be prepared and stay alert.
Stay frosty. So what is the FBI doing right now, and what should Americans be watching for? How do you spot a threat that's designed to be invisible?
Yeah, right now the FBI is running on all cylinders. Their JTTFs are running down every possible lead. They're working with the federal agencies, state and local. They're going to be checking every intel source. And I would always ask people, if you see anything that seems out of the ordinary, our population is our greatest ears and eyes. If you see something that just doesn't sit right, it just isn't normal to what you're seeing, call the FBI. And I would have to ask our folks in the Persian community, if there's any attacks in the United States, you could very well be victims of retaliatory hate crimes. So if you see something, if you know something, please call local authorities, call the FBI.
And we have the number right here because the FBI has a tip line, so I'm glad you said that. 1-800-CALL-FBI. There's also a website you can go to right there. It is tips.fbi.gov. Former FBI Special Agent in Charge and head of the Chicago PD, Jody Weiss. We appreciate all your insight. Thanks for joining us this morning. Have a good one.
Always a pleasure. Stay safe.
Hey, stay frosty.
President Trump wisely does not remove options off of the table. Mothers out there are worried that we're going to have a draft, that they're going to see their sons get in and daughters get involved in this. What do you want to say about the president's plans for troops on the ground? As we know, it's been largely an air campaign up until now.
It has been, and it will continue to be, and President Trump wisely does not remove options off of the table. I know a lot of politicians like to do that quickly, but the president, as commander-in-chief, wants to continue to assess the success of this military operation. It's not part of the current plan right now, but the president, again, wisely keeps his options on the table. But as commander-in-chief, there's no greater priority or responsibility to this president than, of course, protecting the American people and protecting our troops.
Donald Trump is panicking over his unlawful war in Iran. It's going terrible, and now the Trump regime says that they are not ruling out the possibility of a draft. Donald Trump's chief propagandist, Caroline Leavitt, went on state regime media, which calls itself Fox, and she was asked by Maria Bartiromo about how lots of parents out there are worried that their kids could be drafted if this war continues to spiral. And can you rule that out, Caroline? And Caroline Leavitt says, we're not going to rule that out. Donald
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being here. A quick reminder, you're welcome to watch this video and more content on my Substack and my Patreon at worldaffairsandcontext.com. At this time, I'm very pleased to offer 10% off an annual subscription, so just use the links in the video description below to join our community. Oil prices have just smashed through the $100 per barrel mark for the first time in nearly 4 years. This could be one of the largest disruptions
to global oil markets in modern history. The sudden surge is being driven by the United States-Israel war on Iran, an illegal war on Iran, and its ripple effects are already spreading across the global economy. Energy markets, shipping routes, financial markets, and everyday consumer prices are all being shaken at the same exact time. This is a disaster in the making. Many analysts say the situation could become even more serious if the conflict continues to escalate. Now, after the United States-Israeli strikes on Iran's oil facilities over the weekend, which resulted in acid rain falling on Tehran, a city of 10 plus million people, it may be safe to say that the situation is escalating very, very quickly. At one point overnight, oil prices nearly hit $120 a barrel. That kind of move in such a short period of time is extremely rare in the oil market. Prices eased slightly after reports surfaced that Western governments were discussing emergency steps to bring fuel prices down, but the relief is very limited, even if that happens. And of course, the bigger question remains open. The question is, when will this illegal war on Iran end? U.S. oil futures jumped about $8 per barrel to around $99 per barrel, while Brent crude, which is the global benchmark, climbed roughly $9 to about $101 per barrel. These are among the large.
This season, you've got places to go, people to see, and things to do. You may have already gotten vaccinated for flu and COVID-19, but other respiratory illnesses are still out there. If you're 50 or older, even if you're healthy, it may be important to help protect against pneumococcal pneumonia. And if you have certain health conditions, it may be important to help protect against RSV too.
$1 per barrel. These are among the largest single-day increases ever recorded in dollar terms. Just think about that. The force driving the current spike is very, very dangerous. The biggest factor behind the surge is disruption around the Strait of Hormuz, of course. On Monday, March the 9th, the United-Israel coalition began bombing Iranian oil tankers in the Gulf. While this has no strategic military value, as one would imagine, it serves the purpose of destructing and annihilating a foreign country and disrupting energy flows. Shipping companies and maritime insurers refuse to operate in the area. And as a result of that, oil pickups and deliveries across parts of the Middle East have slowed dramatically. Analysts estimate that as much as 20% of global oil supply could be affected by this disruption. And to put that in perspective, that is roughly twice the scale of the disruption experienced during the Suez Crisis in the 1950s. Another major problem is that the war has effectively wiped out global spare capacity, and here's why this is important. Normally, certain producers can quickly increase output to stabilize markets when supply shocks occur. But if major exporters cannot move their oil, cannot move their product through the Strait of Hormuz, that safety valve actually disappears completely. Without spare capacity acting as a buffer, the oil market becomes far more fragile and prone to extreme price swings. Energy analyst Bob McNally, for example, summed up the situation very bluntly. He said the market now has, quote, no meaningful cushion, meaning there is effectively no swing producer available to stabilize prices. When disrupted in this kind of environment, prices can spike much faster and higher than they otherwise would. There's also an unusual logistical problem emerging in the region. Because oil shipments have slowed down so dramatically, effectively it happened over a span of just 5 days, producers are starting to run out of storage space. And this is a big problem. Nobody's talking about this. If oil cannot be moved onto tankers and shipped to global markets, it eventually begins to pile up in storage facilities. And when storage fills up, producers may be forced to slow down production itself, which reduces supply even further and can push prices higher. Consumers are already starting to feel the impact in the United States. For example, gasoline prices have jumped roughly by 50 cents cents per gallon in just 1 week. The national average is now hovering around $3.45 per gallon, and analysts expect that those prices are going to continue climbing even higher as the disruptions persist. Gasoline is usually the first and most visible place where people notice energy price shocks. But gasoline prices are only the beginning. When oil becomes more expensive, the cost of transportation rises across the entire economy. Airlines face higher jet fuel costs, trucking companies pay more for diesel, of course, and shipping companies see their operating expenses surge. Businesses often pass those higher costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So now we should expect higher prices across the board. What's important to understand here is that food prices are particularly sensitive to energy costs. Oil and natural gas are used to produce fertilizers, power farm machinery, and transport crops from farms to process facilities and grocery stores. According to the International Energy Agency, energy can account for up to half of the variable costs in food production in advanced economies. That means rising oil prices can quickly translate into higher grocery bills. All of this is happening at a time when many households across the United States are already dealing with rising living costs. This is why economists are increasingly worried about the possibility of stagflation, which is a situation where inflation rises, and it is going to rise because energy costs are surging. And so stagflation is a situation where inflation rises while economic growth slows and unemployment increases. Well, what did we have in February? Unemployment numbers are actually up, and the jobs market is weakening while inflation is rising and the United States economy is slowing. So we're definitely on the path to stagflation. And if Trump's war of choice continues, this may even lead to a depression. Economists at Bank of America warn that a sustained surge in oil prices could tighten financial conditions across the entire country. Higher fuel and food costs reduce consumers' spending power, so people have less disposable income, and they can put additional strain on households that are already financially stretched. Analysts warn that continued price increases could lead to higher levels of credit card delinquencies and auto loan defaults. Governments are already trying to prevent the situation from escalating further. Finance ministers from the G7 countries on Monday, on March the 9th, are discussing the possibility of releasing strategic oil reserves in order to increase supply and to calm markets. Meanwhile, the administration of Donald Trump has floated the idea of offering insurance coverage for oil tankers and potentially providing U.S. naval escorts to protect ships traveling through the region. Now, that is not a safe adventure, and it would be unwise to assume that no accidents, whether intentional or unintentional, could not occur. And of course, who will pay for that? Well, of course, U.S. taxpayers. The longer the disruption lasts, the greater the pressure will be on governments to intervene. If the Strait of Hormuz remains partially closed and oil prices stay above $100 per barrel for an extended period of time, the consequences will be brutal. If you found this video interesting, please be sure to check out more content on Substack and Patreon. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. And I certainly look forward to seeing you here soon. Take care.